Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thanks for Sharing. I'm your host, Jackie Pack. And today I have back with me Bridget Good. Welcome, Bridget.
Hi.
So, as listeners are getting to know Bridget, I thought it would be good to ask Bridget a question. So, Bridget is not originally from Utah. She currently lives in Utah, which is how she works at Healing Paths. But tell us, Bridget, like what brought you to Utah? What's your impression of Utah?
Well, so I'm divorced and I co-parent with my ex-husband. We have two kids together. And we were living in Vegas at the time, and he got remarried and they wanted to move, and they wanted to move to Florida first, and
Oh,
I absolutely refused to move to Florida. No offense to any Floridians out there, it's just not my vibe. Um, and so they came back and they were like, well, what about Utah? And I said, sure. So I moved here essentially for my kids. Um, and yeah, I've been here for 2.5 years. It feels
okay.
longer than that.
Did you grow? You
Um,
grew up in Nevada, though, right?
in Vegas,
Okay.
yeah. I left when I was 19. I joined the Air Force. I lived in Washington State and the United Kingdom for a
Mm,
little bit, and then went back to Vegas, moved to Colorado, back to Vegas, and now I'm here. So,
okay. Okay.
um, yeah, my impression of Utah, I love it here. Like I've been to Utah before. When I lived in Vegas, I would come up this way for camping trips a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I already knew the area. Not, I didn't know it like well, but I knew of the area before we moved here. Um, soda shops are weird to me.
Oh, soda shops are huge here.
I
We
know.
in Utah, I wouldn't say necessarily me, but in Utah, we love our sodas. I think we're the top
Yeah,
selling state in the country for soda, and we love like adding flavors and adding all sorts
yeah.
of stuff. Yeah.
It's just funny to me that we're putting sugar into sugar.
Well, I think a lot of at least a lot of women I know drink diet,
Sure,
but then add the sugar back in.
great. Hey, like I'll go to a soda shop. I just it's real funny when I moved here. I was like, man, there are so many soda shops here. That's not a
Uh-huh.
thing you get in Vegas at
Yeah.
all. Actually, I don't think I've ever seen a soda shop anywhere other than Utah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Um,
We have a lot of them.
yeah.
Like, I don't know if you had lived here yet when there were kind of the soda wars going on between
Uh-uh.
different companies and their
No.
brands. And, so maybe one of the first popular drinks was a dirty Diet Coke, which is basically you can have Coke or Diet Coke and lime and a coconut
Okay.
syrup. Um,
Sure.
and so one of the first ones to pop up did that. And then other people started, adding that to their menu. And I think the
Mhm.
first soda shop, which I don't know who that was basically like, hey, you're stealing like we called it the dirty Diet Coke, and now you're stealing it. And so there was kind of this whole kind of lawsuits, and I think they just kind of fizzled out
Oh,
and didn't
wow.
really go anywhere. Because I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know if you could, copyright,
Proof.
like patent dirty Diet Coke. But anyway, that's what that is for the listeners. And so that's
Interesting.
kind of an example of what is available at the many, many soda shops in Utah, things like that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
we're glad to have you here. And,
I'm
one
happy to
of the
be
things
here.
that Bridget and I have talked about lately is, we run into the patriarchy as therapists,
Oh
and
gosh.
that can be very frustrating, especially as
We
females.
talked about Yeah, I mean, we talked about it this last, like I was telling you in your office, like I don't know what is happening this week. But
The
the
patriarchy was
patriarchy
like chasing
just
Bridget down.
just like decided to ruin my week and was
Right.
just like, let's just make Bridget's week bad.
Yeah.
Like,
On several
uh,
fronts, right? It was happening in several
personal
ways.
and
Yeah.
professional. I was
Yeah.
like, what is happening? Where am I right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So probably people in other red states, conservative states, could relate in different ways. And, we get that here too. Unless maybe you're living in a blue state and then you might be like, because I had a mentor that I was working with and she was in Santa Monica and
Mm.
she would say to me, like, that's still a thing. And I'm like, oh, it's doing very well in Utah. I love that you're like, patriarchy is still a thing. She said to me, I thought that was an issue our mother solved, or maybe our grandmother solved. I'm like, I don't think it's been solved.
Not even like a little bit in
Yeah.
some places. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure even in Santa Monica, it's still like in pockets,
Yes. Yeah.
like I'm
Well,
sure
and
it's
she did
still
tell me
there.
later, like a couple years after that conversation, her father passed away and she was the executor. And, so she's talking to his accountant, I think, or maybe it was the attorney. And she was like, okay, yeah, ran into the patriarchy because he didn't know what to do with a like female executor and was like, you just don't worry your little head. You don't have to understand
Mm,
finances. And she's like, I run a business. Like, I understand. Like, my dad put me as the executor for a reason. Anyway, so she was like, okay, it is a thing. I'm like, yes, it is. I'm sorry you ran into it and it burst your bubble.
right. I mean, that must have been nice to just been like, la la la, it doesn't exist
Right?
anymore.
Right.
Life is so good, at
Yeah.
least for a little bit. Yeah.
So, another thing just to let listeners know, so Bridget has done her levels 1 and 2 of the Gottman training. So have
Yes.
I. I did mine, I don't know, several years ago. And so she texted me and was like, hey, let's do a intensive, like a couples intensive working on just communication skills, relationship skills. So we are going to do that a 2-day. We decided 2-day, right?
I think so, yeah.
So a 2-day, probably like a Friday, Saturday. And, you can fly in from out of state if you want to do that, if that sounds like something that you would be benefited from, or if you're local. We'll be getting the dates once we finalize those, and a location will get that put up on our website under, I think we have an events tab. So once we get that set, we're looking at sometime in October. I might have already said that. And yeah, so look for that. And I'll probably talk about it again on the podcast. But that's, I think, something a lot of couples can benefit from. Like, not just, this isn't, we're not marketing this just to the clients at Healing Paths or sex addiction, betrayal, trauma.
Right.
I think most couples need help with communication skills and how to do it right. I mean, they're
Yeah.
communicating, it just may not be in a beneficial way.
Yeah. And I think just understanding that conflict is not a bad thing, because I
Right.
think that is a real big narrative with being married or being in a
Uh-huh.
long-term relationship, that conflict is bad, and it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Or it's
Yeah.
just going to happen. Like, conflict is a
Right.
part of any relationship. So, it's just a matter of knowing how to navigate it when it comes up, not trying to avoid it.
Right. Or just even looking at it as like an opportunity for like the relationship to grow.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm
So,
excited.
yeah, I think it'll be fun. So back when Bridget and I did our last podcast episode on the Ashley Madison scandal, uh, we had also mentioned in talking about that episode, just her and I had talked about doing a podcast episode on emotional availability. And I think, did you have a client who asked you like what that was or something? Is that how that came
Yeah.
about? Yeah.
Yeah, he came in and was like, "What is emotional availability?" And I did my magical therapist thing where I said, "Well, what does it mean to you?" uh, and we kind of talked about it, and I had realized that there's not like a definition of out there of what it is. I mean, I think you can look at something and be like, that is definitely emotionally unavailable. And you
Yeah.
can look at certain things and be like, that definitely is emotionally available. But then there's like a lot of gray, I think.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So,
Well, and this last week in staff meeting, you brought it up just because we were going to be recording this podcast and put it
mhm.
out to the team, just like, what are the different aspects of emotional availability that you see, or how do you talk to clients about emotional availability? And so we had a good discussion in staff meeting about emotional availability and what's involved in that. So Bridget and I are going to break that down today in this podcast episode. I did a podcast episode in July on family reunions because I don't know if you know this, but July is National Family Reunion Month.
Didn't know that.
So I learned a lot of things prepping for that podcast episode. And like at one point, I'm like, ooh, that just got a little dark. Like, I didn't realize there was a dark history behind family reunions. Um,
Is there really?
yeah, it goes back to the
Okay.
emancipation
Oh, wow.
when literally Black families who had been separated were trying to reunify, right? Reunification.
Okay.
That's
Makes
how it
sense.
started. And I was
Makes
like, oh, that just got dark.
sense.
Okay, yeah, wow.
Yeah.
So I was talking about that, and then in part of the podcast episode, I talked about like you can also get a lot of anxiety at the thought of going to a family reunion, or
Mm,
even being around your family members can bring up anxiety. I mean, it depends on the family, right? Because there's also research that says, family reunions can be a really positive thing on your mental health.
mm.
And I'm guessing, like I added, depending on the family, I'm thinking, because
Sure.
and then it can also bring up a lot of anxiety. It can manifest like social anxiety around that coming up.
Mhm.
And then I was talking about people who go no contact with family for
Mm,
some period of time. And over in the UK, they had done a study on like when there was like I can't remember, family estrangement. That's the word I'm looking for. When there has been family estrangement, whether that's between siblings or a parent and a child, um, what is it that the person wants from that relationship? And in every single one, whether it was like an estrangement with dad, an estrangement with mom, an estrangement with a sibling, and they broke out siblings between brother and sister. The one continuous thing that their research found was they wanted emotional closeness.
mm,
And so
mhm.
obviously there wasn't emotional availability there present, because I think if you can be emotionally available, you will have emotional closeness.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's the ability to, because when I like to think in metaphors a lot. I do this in my own like personal therapy a lot. It helps me make sense of concepts sometimes. When I think of emotional availability, I think of like opening the door to your inner world to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in a very, because there's emotional availability and then there's emotional volatility. And those
Mm-hmm.
two things are not the same thing at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you're emotionally available, there's like a regulation to it. Um,
Well,
where
I
you're like
think,
slowly introducing someone to your like inner emotional world.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yeah.
I I feel too like I have a couple that I've been working with for a long time post an affair.
Mm,
And you know, I meet with them individually, and sometimes we do some joint sessions. And he had brought up an issue like, feel like I should have known this in year one, but okay, give it to me in year 7. That's fine. Um, and I think I've sensed that he is not emotionally available to himself. And that's one of
mm,
the things that his wife often brings up if we have joint sessions is, I want there to be an emotional closeness in our relationship. And he has told me, and I mean, he's probably told her, which didn't help, but he would rather vacuum the house twice a day, every day, forever,
Hmm.
than have to deal with the emotions. And, so we've been working on that for him. Or I've been working on that with him. And, he recently just was talking about being dissociated. Like, he didn't have that term. He was just like, I, like, most of the time, unless, like, he's an engineer. So if he's focused at work, he can focus at work. But he's like, otherwise, like, most of the time, I'm somewhere else in my head. And that goes back as long as I can remember. And I was like, oh, okay, we call that being dissociated. And I didn't know that about you. Like, I didn't know that you dissociate. Like, it makes sense. And he's like, I mean, I'm not trying to. I'm like, no, I get it. Like, I get it. And he's like, I'm not trying to be resistant to therapy. I'm like, I don't think that, like, I'm glad to know this. Like, I need to know this. Right. So
Yeah.
I also think, you know, there has to be some emotional competency
Mm.
within yourself before there can be emotional availability.
I mean, you have to like be emotionally available to yourself. Kind of
Yes.
like what you're saying. Like you have to be in your own inner world and even know what that looks like and paint that picture for yourself
Mm-hmm.
before
Mm-hmm.
you can allow someone else to come in and see that.
Mm-hmm. And,
Yeah.
on the rare occasion, I mean, it's probably been four or five times in my work with him, he'll say, I feel lonely.
Mm.
And he wants his wife to emotionally be there for him. But I'm like, it doesn't work that way. Like, because if she's emotionally available for you, but you're very uncomfortable with emotions, like,
Right.
what is she needed to be available for? Because you're not going to open that up. You're not going to let her in because you don't let yourself in. And so, like, that's, even if she wanted, which she will say, I want to have this emotional closeness. I want to be there for you.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'm like, yeah, we're running into this block of, you don't actually know yourself
Right.
on an emotional
I
level.
Yeah, and that reminds me of like the concept of an attunement.
Mm-hmm.
Like in order, because you have two people, and if we think of like a parent-child relationship, um, the child is like letting up all their feelings, and the parent is looking at the child and being like, "Oh, you're really angry right now, or you're really
Mm-hmm.
sad, or whatever." Um, but if you're not letting that up in a regulated way, right? Like not emotionally volatile where you're just like screaming and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not letting that up, then how can the other person be attuned to you? They just can't.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about maybe let's put together a definition,
Oh
um,
gosh.
or maybe just a
A working
description of what's
definition.
required, right? So
Sure.
I think we covered that, like, there has to be emotional competency yourself
Mm-hmm.
and a knowing of your inner landscape. That's usually what I call it, is this, we have this inner landscape and we have to know it pretty well.
Yeah. And not be afraid to go
Mm-hmm.
there with
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. There
Yeah.
has to be some depth. Like we have to
Yes.
have depth with
Right.
ourselves.
Right.
Like bordering, well, it feels almost spiritual to me in a way, like that depth that you have with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I guess for everyone it would be different, but
Yeah. But
yeah.
we're talking about maybe the core of the self, or some people might call it the soul, the heart of the
Right.
self, right?
Right.
And yeah, like any of our previous attachment experiences or trauma experiences are going to get in the way of that connection with that more authentic
Mhm.
core. Um, and we have to be able to move past that and so it might require some trauma work, it might require some attachment work, and just understanding ourselves, right? So sometimes I'll say to clients, like, I have to be able to know, like, if I do something and somebody calls me out for it, I have to know, like, yeah, that's true. I
Mhm.
was, there was snark in that. Or, like
Yeah.
my husband and I were driving in the car the other day, and sometimes he can get, I mean, I get super frustrated sometimes driving. It's one of the things that where I'm probably the most triggered, or I get like
Sure.
dysregulated the most with driving. And he does too sometimes. And so he'll get mad at drivers, and kind of like, he doesn't honk or do anything like that, but he'll say it to me. And then like 15 minutes later, he does this very same thing he was so mad about. And I'm like, you do know, right? Like, I mean, and I'm like, I'm not judging, because sometimes I do that. Like, I'm so frustrated when somebody else does something and then I do the same thing. And
Right.
somebody like honks at me, and I'm like, oh, please give me a break. Like, and so I'm like, but you have to have that. I have to have that awareness that, like,
Right.
I just did the thing that I got frustrated with, and
Hmm.
I'm asking for grace, and I did not show that. Right. Um,
Right.
so I think some of that, like, we also have to know, like, okay, yeah, I can be whatever, right? Like, that part of myself that isn't maybe the most, what would I say? Um, it's maybe not the side we want everybody to see.
Sure.
It's a side of us that can get frustrated, that can, maybe feel superior or something like that. Like, that side will come out. And we just have to be able to acknowledge that and kind of rein it back in when it comes out.
Right. I don't know who said this. This may be Jungian psychology, like train or line of thinking, about judgments and shadow selves. And when you judge someone, like that initial judgment, kind of like with your husband, like, I can't believe you
Uh-huh.
just did that. You're really judging yourself.
Uh-huh.
Um, like that's something that you're afraid of that you are, or that, like,
Yeah. The
it's
whole,
part of,
you spot it, you got it.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Um, I'm sorry for any listeners that's not Jungian and you're like screaming at the at the
No,
phone right now or
I
whatever.
do think that that is like a
I think
Jungian
it's Jungian, yeah.
concept. Um, just kind of looking at that projection that we do.
Right. There we go. Projection. That's a good word. Yeah.
So, okay, so
Um,
we talked about emotional competency. Then we have to have, I would say there has to be some safety in the relationship for us to open up that depth, and that, because it's vulnerable when we do it.
right.
And
Right.
so, if, I mean, not everybody will wait for safety, or, sometimes they open it up to somebody that hits that familiar trauma pattern, and then that doesn't go well, because it's a
Hmm.
repetition of something else. And so I think we also have to have some safety and know what that safety would look and feel like, in order to then start opening that up.
Right. And that is acquired over time, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I have been on, uh, we talk about this in staff meeting. I'm pretty open about it. I mean, I'm not single right now. Um, but when I was, and I was dating, we talked about like trauma dumping and
Uh-huh,
me being
uh-huh.
like on these dates, right? And then being trauma dumped on, and me being like, okay, this check is yours. This
Uh-huh,
is you
uh-huh.
paying for your therapy session tonight.
Yeah.
But going back to that thought of like, the safety is built over time. You're not
Mhm,
dumping on somebody like all of your emotional baggage, right? Like, there's
mhm.
some regulation to that. Um, because really, you want to keep that other person safe as well as yourself.
Right,
Like,
right.
you don't want to, like, there's some parts that you shouldn't um reveal until you've known this person after several months, or when it feels like appropriate for them to know that about you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I feel
not
like,
only,
oh, go ahead.
no, I was just like, not only for the other person, but for like yourself, like you deserve that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I sometimes my brother reminds me. So the brother right under me, like when he was, I don't know, maybe 13, 14, and again, like there wasn't a lot of parental guidance happening. And
Mm.
he started wearing cologne. And, like any probably 14-year-old boy does, like smelled like he bathed in it. And so one day, like, because I could drive, and so I just like probably took him somewhere with me, and I was like, let me just give you a secret. Like, cologne is something that should be discovered, not announced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he's reminded me of that over the years. And we've talked too about how, true that is in a lot of different settings, like not just with
Right.
cologne, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes getting to know that other person in a vulnerable, deep way, it's discovered slowly. It's kind of, a gradual process. It's not just like, boom, here it is, and I'm dumping it.
Right.
And I feel like if people are trauma dumping, they really haven't been able to do like they're probably not
Right.
emotionally competent, which is why it feels more like dumping than sharing.
Right. Because, I mean, in my experience, I'm like not being able to get a word in edgewise. Like,
Yeah.
it's just coming at me. uh, and it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's part of like, I guess both competency and safety is like
Hmm.
being able to parse that out, being able to determine who is safe to tell certain things to and who is not
Hmm.
safe to tell certain things to. And um, yeah, because again, I think that goes back to the attunement piece where if you're just dumping, there's not really any feeling happening there. You're just kind of
Hmm.
telling a story of yourself, but it feels like a novel, and it
Hmm.
feels really heavy. Whereas sharing, I think, is more, there's feeling behind it.
Well, and there's some regulation behind sharing. Like,
Right.
I can share my story. Like, I could probably do it on, I don't know, 10 different tiers. I can give a really
Mm,
high level. And
right.
then as we get more into that story, I can go deeper and deeper. Um, but I think for the most part, I can stay regulated with my story.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it means like if I cried about something, I don't think that's me not being regulated. Like I
Right.
still might feel the impact of my story sometimes when I'm sharing it, or if I'm sharing it and the other person is like, wow, that's a lot. Like sometimes that feedback, because, I think we can all do this with our story, is that we just normalized it. Like,
Mm,
I mean, I know these things were wrong, but you know, that was a long time ago or whatever. And then when
sure.
somebody else is hearing it and they're kind of reacting, sometimes that might get me more emotional. And I don't think being emotional means you're not regulated. It's just having that emotional connection and not just kind of that intellectual connection.
Right. Yeah. Which I get clients like that where they're just telling a story like
Hmm.
this is a normal Tuesday that this happened,
Yeah. Yeah.
that they were stuck in traffic or I don't know, whatever, late picking up the kids from school. And it's like, those are two very different things that we're
Hmm.
talking about. They should sound different.
Hmm.
Um,
And I mean,
yeah.
as a therapist, we're often feeling the emotion that our client can't or hasn't yet.
Mm, mm-hmm.
And so sometimes we're reflecting that back, whether that's like, wow, I'm feeling really angry for you. Like, does that make you angry? And usually they're like, oh, no, don't get angry. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'm fine with my
Right.
anger. Like, I'm not going to go blow up or something, but
Right.
like that should not happen. And I'm so angry that that happened to you. Right.
Mm,
Um, or sometimes we're like, sad. And it's just that, wow, like that I'm feeling a lot of sadness with you telling me that story
Mhm.
because I'm picturing this younger you. And that's like, it's heartbreaking.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because sometimes they get really uncomfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
Clients do. Um, which, when we're talking about emotional availability, again, like they're just not emotionally available to themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and then when you're reflecting back that to them, they're like, whoa, man,
Yeah.
I did not come here for this today.
Right.
So those can be pretty intense sessions when that
Mm-hmm.
happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's see. Another factor of emotional availability, I feel like, is, you know, knowing your emotional availability.
Mm.
So, like, we talk about this as therapists, like, sometimes knowing if I've got my own stuff up, can I kind of like in between sessions or, before I start my work, can I kind of put that to the side
Mhm.
and so that I'm not like myself feeling all of my emotions? Because that can be confusing then when our clients are having emotions and it's confusing as to are these mine or are they theirs? Whose
Right.
feelings do I pick up right now? And so I think sometimes that happens and we're just not available. And I mean, we
Mhm.
have to acknowledge that. We have to say, like, hey, I'm not really in a space right now to um, be there for this, but let me, give me 24 hours. Can I circle back to you in 4 hours? Let me just get this
Yeah.
regulated. I mean, that's not what we're doing as a therapist. I think sometimes in between sessions, especially if like I'm feeling something for my client, I have to just take a few minutes and let that go before I walk in with another client.
Right. Yeah, or even like in relationships, right? Like I had something recently um where some past stuff was coming up in
Just
the
trying to
current.
move so that
You're good, no worries.
the sun is coming in really bright here, and it looks like I'm like on fire here. Okay, go ahead.
You just look like you're illuminated from the
Right.
back. um where like past stuff, like my own childhood stuff was coming up into the current situation, and it takes work. It takes work
Mm-hmm.
to be like, okay, what is actually happening right now? Is this like really how I'm feeling about this current situation and this current person, or is this past trauma experiences that are being projected onto this person because the situation feels similar, or the person
Right.
has done something that feels similar to something that happened in my childhood. And that's like part of the trauma work, right? Is like
Uh-huh.
it's the wrong place and the wrong person at the wrong time, but it's coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're emotionally available, or when you've done that work, you can know, like, okay, this actually has nothing to do with you, and I need to work through that,
Right.
because I don't like, some past feelings are happening. I'm being re-triggered by this. I'm not quite sure why, but I can tell that this has nothing to do with you specifically, personally. It has
Right.
something to
Right.
do with whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And kind of knowing our limits, because again, if if something's coming up and it's not about this person, let's put it in the example of a partner. It actually isn't about my partner,
right.
but maybe something the partner did, which was neither right or wrong, triggered this other thing for me.
Mhm.
But I know that's still not about my partner. Like that what they did was kind of neutral, but it triggered this other experience or these emotions. And I may have to say, like, hey, I'm feeling this because when you did this, it brought this up. But
Mhm.
I'm really not in a place to talk about it right now because I will blame you.
Right.
And I know it's not your fault. But if we start talking about it, I don't know that I won't go there. So let me just have a couple, hours or days with this, and then I can circle back and we can talk about it.
Right. And I think for the other partner, the partner that isn't triggered, we'll call that partner one is the triggered partner, partner two is the non-triggered partner. For partner two, it's like that emotional availability piece is one, not taking it personally, two, being able to like work through whatever is going through you at that moment, because
Uh-huh,
I'm sure
uh-huh.
that's going to elicit some sort of emotional response.
Yeah,
And then three, like trying not to take it personally,
yeah,
um, which I think is really hard to do. Like,
yeah,
it's really hard to not take it personally and feel like, well, what did I do wrong? Or, whatever, like she's mad at me or he's mad at me. They shouldn't be, or, um, and it's just like, no, it's just, you're the wrong person at the wrong time. And
right.
unfortunately, that just happens
Hmm.
sometimes.
Hmm.
But if both partners are emotionally available enough, then the first partner will be able to say, like, I don't know what's happening. I need to figure it out. This actually has nothing to do with you. I
Yeah,
just need some time. And then the second partner is going to be able to say, okay, I can give that to you and I'm not going to try to take this personally.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And for partner two, who is the one that was not initially triggered,
Right.
they might be able to, while this person is taking the time to regulate or work through something that came up, they may look at them like, they have time with their self. So they may be thinking like, did I do something wrong? Like,
Mm,
and, sometimes we're like, I don't think so. Like, sometimes when we think, how did I trigger my partner? Sometimes we can be like, oh, I know this is a soft spot for them.
mm,
And I didn't intentionally do this, but I wonder if that's what triggered it. Again, we may be right or wrong, but
right.
sometimes we can, come to that awareness of maybe this, like maybe I was skimming over this because I was talking about it from me, but I know that's a soft spot for my partner. And
Mm,
again, I didn't do something wrong. We wouldn't say that was wrong, but we could sometimes say like, yeah, yeah, I know it's a soft spot. If they come
mhm,
back and it is about that, being able to say, I know it's a soft spot. And the way that I was talking about it, I wasn't cognizant that that might hit something for you. But I get it. I know that it's a soft spot.
right.
So, yeah, it's not, I think sometimes when I'm talking with clients, I will say, like, my belief is adults don't get in trouble.
Mm,
Now, maybe we might break the law, and we get in trouble for that, but that's a legal issue, right? I think though for most of us we had that situation in childhood of getting in trouble, whether that was at school or at home or all the other places we are as kids. And I think getting in trouble is a very childhood experience.
mhm,
But oftentimes in adulthood, we're like, I feel like I'm getting in trouble. And I'm
right.
like, okay, because like when I think of getting in trouble, I think of like getting grounded, sent to my
Mhm,
room. Like, do people do that with you in your adult life? No. Like, nobody's taking the car keys from you because you upset them or you broke curfew, right? So
right.
I'm like, but we can have that feeling. And I will say, sometimes just being aware, we know that emotional experience because we had that in childhood. And looking at it now, like maybe it's not black and white. I was wrong. They were right. It's
Mhm,
more, we didn't navigate something well. And a lot of times there's not that intention to cause hurt,
right.
but we can cause hurt when there's no intention to hurt. And so I think
Mhm,
just kind of navigating that in a way, because I think if I feel in trouble, that's setting up a much more black and white conversation
mm,
where one person is getting defensive because if they feel like they were
right.
wrong per se, they're gonna be defensive and argue that like I didn't do anything wrong.
Mhm,
Yeah, that's not maybe what this is about.
right. And like sometimes it can be, right? Like
Uh-huh.
sometimes there are just complaints in relationship of just like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wish you would do this differently or whatever. And then sometimes it's just not. Like sometimes it has nothing to do with the other person. And I think so then like back to emotional availability, I was thinking a lot about this yesterday. When I think of emotionally available people, I think of emotionally mature people and
Mm-hmm.
emotionally intelligent people. Like you have
Yeah.
to have some level of maturity and intelligence in order to be available for yourself and your partner, and to
Right.
not think like that black and white thinking, because
Mm-hmm.
most of the time it's way more nuanced
Mm-hmm.
than just, well, you said this and that hurt my feelings or whatever. Like sometimes it is just that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like it is that simple, and then most of the time it's just not.
Mm-hmm. And the Gottmans talk about this when they're talking about like meta communication.
Right, meta
So
emotions, is it
yeah,
meta emotions?
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll often say to clients, like in any conversation, we kind of have like two tracks running.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that top track and the one that we're intellectually engaging with is about the content of what we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about. And then the more hidden track is the meta emotions, like what's happening while we're communicating, right?
Right.
And often I find one of the mistakes people will make when they're communicating is they might feel it, because sometimes I'll stop clients and I'll be like, did you just feel that? Like I felt it. Did you feel this shift from your spouse or your partner?
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel that? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, and okay, but you just continued in the content. Like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people are afraid to drop down into more of those meta emotions and be like, wait, did I lose you? What just happened? Because then we have
Right.
to stop. Like, it's not, I will say, it's not the most uh, convenient way of communicating, except it is far more effective. So if we're
Mm-hmm.
looking at effective communication and not having to like have misunderstanding or like all of that, then we have to drop down and have the conversations about what emotion came up and before we can continue on with the content.
Right. And you're right. Like it takes a lot more time.
Uh-huh.
It's a lot more draining. It's not
Uh-huh.
A plus B equals C. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but if you want to be like less emotionally lonely in your relationship
Right.
or any relationships, really,
Mm-hmm.
not just romantic, um, you
Or
have
if we
to
actually
do
want to
that.
resolve whatever came up,
Right.
instead of like having it come up and we fight four more times about it,
Right.
then we're just going to have to do it when we felt it and have that conversation and drop down into the emotions and get out of our intellect. But I think we're far more comfortable, and our culture tells us like mind over
Mm-hmm.
matter. And
Right.
so we will prioritize being intellectual over being emotional.
Right.
And I usually just tell clients like the problem with that thinking of mind over matter is that as human beings, we are matter.
Yeah, this is a personal realization. I had a personal realization in therapy, which it wasn't like massive, but I was just like I was feeling bad. This is kind of a tangent. But maybe it'll help somebody. I don't know. I was feeling bad about some of my feelings this past week of just like I shouldn't be feeling this way. Like I'm overreacting. I should be more chill about the situation. I should be more relaxed. And then I was like, wait a minute, who told me that? Like, where am
Mm-hmm.
I getting that messaging from? Who told me that I shouldn't have these feelings? Like, and then I'm like, of course, society told me that, or whatever, our culture told me that, um, to like have feelings about a certain situation is wrong or bad or doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
you relaxed or chill. And apparently, I'm supposed to be relaxed or chill, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
know why. Like, it feels silly. Like, we're emotional
Well, that would make for
beings.
a much more convenient child if they just don't
Right.
feel certain things.
Right.
and are happy all the time and compliant all the time, right? But
Yeah.
that's not going to result in a child that actually develops into a functional adult.
Right. Or just, yeah, like an emotionally available adult,
Yeah,
unless
yeah,
they get a lot of therapy.
right, right.
um, so it's interesting how those messages, either through our culture or through the family system, like comes through sometimes, and you're just
Mm-hmm.
like, wait a minute, like who told me that I shouldn't be a feeling human? Like that's literally all we are, just feeling
Yeah,
people. Like
yeah.
we
Well,
were
and
all
I think
feeling
it's
before we developed any
right.
cognition.
Yes,
Like,
right.
yeah,
We felt before we ever thought.
right.
Um, I think it's Dan Siegel who came up with the phrase, you got to name it to tame it.
Mm-hmm.
And so many times we will spin out in this, but should I feel this way? And
Mm,
why is this a big deal? And it shouldn't be a big deal. And just relax and just knock it off. And he's just like, I mean, you're just wasting time and
right,
getting more dysregulated because once we start to say, this is what I'm feeling and this is why I'm feeling it, it starts to calm it down. Like that's
right,
when we can actually regulate it because now we're naming what it is that's going on for us. And yeah, but there's all sorts of reasons why we might spin out before we finally get to just giving ourselves permission and identifying it, put our finger on it, name it. Sometimes I will say to clients, like, I'll use an example and I'll say, it's kind of like, let's say, because, like, I mean, as therapists, we're not talking the majority of the session, but we're talking.
mm-hmm.
That's what we do for our job. And so I have to drink a lot during my sessions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, let's say that right now I want to take a drink. But I'm like, well, I just took a drink like 10 minutes ago. Like, why would you need a drink again right now? And I can get in all sorts of internal conflict about whether or not I should need another drink right now. Or I can just take a drink of the water sitting right next to me and be done with it, right?
Right,
But I think we do that all the time. Or like we're out to dinner and the waiters, will come by like, do you want more water? Do you want more water? They don't care if you say no. They're not offended.
right,
And they're not offended if you're like, yeah, I would like, could you fill it up? And like, it's kind of that like we don't get too much in the weeds when it
mm-hmm.
comes to thirst. And can we take somewhat of that approach when it comes to our emotions?
Right. In a regulated way.
Yep, yep,
Yeah. Which then, like, are you emotionally available to yourself? Are you
right.
allowed to like not criticize yourself into a tizzy
Uh-huh.
because something happened and you had a feeling about it?
Right.
Um, I'm rereading that Pete Walker CPTSD book,
Mm-hmm.
From Surviving to Thriving. And I bookmark a page where he talks about like emotional healing and how the human experience is just a continuum. Like it's a continuum of swinging back and forth like this. And you're just going to keep doing that for the rest of your life.
Right. Right.
Um, but we're told that we're not supposed to, that it's supposed to be very middle and very,
Uh-huh.
the word that comes to mind is like mundane, just like very
Neutral.
calm.
Yeah.
Yeah, like all the time. And that is impossible.
Right.
Um,
Well, and I also think our nervous system is swinging back and forth from the
right.
present to the past, back to the present, back to the past. And
Yeah.
so we have to be checking in. Like everything that comes up for us is not happening in the present. I mean, it is in that it might get triggered, but it may not actually be about what triggered it in the present. And it's more about a past narrative.
Right. Yeah. Someone said once, I don't remember who this was. This wasn't like an author. This might have been just someone that I had met in some sort of like yoga group.
Okay.
She had said something like, I wholeheartedly believe that we're just like all a bunch of toddlers and grown up bodies walking around. And I think that's kind of true on some
Yeah.
level.
I mean, I think the 12 steps named that the adult child.
Sure.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I hope I'm more reasonable than my 2-year-old self was. Most days, right? Most days.
But even just like it comes up, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
the tantrums sometimes
Right.
come up, and
Yes.
like you just have to like kind of let it happen. I mean, in a regulated way, like internally you're like letting it happen and letting
Right.
like riding that wave of that emotional wave.
Uh-huh.
Um yeah, which like I don't know. Like again, just being emotionally available to whatever it is that's happening internally
Mm-hmm.
to yourself and like honoring that. Yeah, I
Right.
think that's the point. Is like what you're saying is like you're honoring that is happening. You're
Mm-hmm.
saying that this is okay. It's okay for you to feel this way. It makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of uh, being like, what are you doing? Like, why are you feeling this way? Criticizing yourself for feeling that
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I also think too, you have to be comfortable being seen to have
Mm,
emotional closeness in a relationship or to have emotional
right.
availability. Because sometimes, we're just going about our life and, we're thinking we're fine. And then somebody's like, hey, are you okay? You seem not yourself. And it's like,
Hmm.
oh, that can make some people incredibly uncomfortable that
Right.
somebody else might see something that they aren't aware of. And that can happen. I mean, we all have blind spots, and
Hmm.
sometimes something hits in that, like, similar vein to our other trauma narratives or attachment narratives, and it's impacting us. And maybe we're trying to fake it till we make it, or we're just trying to pretend like that's not there, but somebody
Hmm.
else can pick up on that. And that is, like, I'll have clients come in and talk about that, and I'm like, I mean, it's actually a gift that they get. Like, they're trying to attune with you, and
Right.
the fact that they felt that and were willing to ask about that is a gift. And they're like, okay, well, I'm super uncomfortable with it. Okay, but you've been telling me like forever that this is what you want.
Right.
And so I get that it may be uncomfortable because it's not the familiar. And yeah, this is what it feels like. This is, I mean, not maybe not feels like every time, but this is what this is. And we're going to have to learn how to get comfortable with being seen and being known. Sometimes that they're aware of that before we are. Another person is aware before we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if you're open to that, I think that can be really healing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think about, parent-child relationships where that wasn't happening, where there was a lot of emotional neglect, where either the child was just completely like their emotional world was completely ignored and just
Mm-hmm.
like shut out, or they were punished for like their having emotions or whatever. But if you allow yourself to be open to that, yeah, it's really uncomfortable, but also like that can be such a healing thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then like that's great therapy right there. Like, why are you
Yeah.
uncomfortable? What exactly is making you uncomfortable?
Uh-huh.
When's the first time that you felt uncomfortable by someone
Right.
noticing you in your emotional internal world?
Yeah.
Um,
Which is
yeah.
intimacy. Like, I will say to clients, like, this is intimacy. And
Hmm.
sometimes we think of intimacy in ways that feels great. And yeah,
Right.
intimacy can feel great. But sometimes intimacy makes us uncomfortable. It's still intimacy and healthy intimacy,
Right.
and it can make you uncomfortable. And that's maybe about your issues with closeness and having yourself known and seen, and that talked about by somebody who's safe and it cares about you. Um, But yeah, I will tell them like intimacy doesn't always feel good, um,
Hmm.
even though that is a good thing.
Right. Which is why we like do this with someone who is safe,
Uh-huh.
that
Yeah.
you've built this up with over time,
Right.
who you know, if they see that in you and they're asking you like, I want to be let in, please let me in,
Hmm.
I want to help you, or like can I please be let in, like
Hmm.
when it's comfortable for you, I'm here, I
Yeah.
want to be
Yeah.
let in.
Or like, can I
um
care for you in this moment?
right,
Care
they're
about
showing
you.
up for you,
Mhm.
exactly. And so you want to do that with somebody who you know is not going to have a harming reaction,
Right.
that's going to harm you even more emotionally. Um, right. Like you want to do it with somebody safe
Hmm.
enough
Hmm.
who can show up for you in that way,
Yeah.
even when you really
The
don't
other
want
thing
to.
I find with clients sometimes, like, and I will say, like, I do feel like we kind of have to learn a language here. Like, we have to
Mm,
learn like an emotional attachment language that I don't think our culture is
mm-hmm,
well versed in. And because sometimes I'll have clients who say, like, I feel like I have to learn a whole other language. I'm like, yes, right. And it's also sad that we have to learn like a foreign language because it
for our
should be,
feelings.
yes, it should be
Yeah.
our, native language.
Right.
And but yeah, sometimes we do have to learn that. And I will often tell them like, I don't think we have to be super articulate. We don't like if we're thinking of like what is the best thing to say right now, I'm like, it's just starting to say something. Like it's
Mm-hmm,
just saying like you can even say, I don't really know what I'm feeling, but I feel this. Like, I don't know that we have to have it all figured out in our head. Again, that's valuing maybe the intellect over the emotion.
mm-hmm,
And I remember like when I was going to grad school, so I went to LSU, so we're
mm,
down in Baton Rouge, and I had one of my really good friends from high school and college. Her father passed away in a, I mean, he was driving on the freeway and had a heart attack. And he didn't hit any, like he just kind of went off the side of the road. He didn't hit anybody. So there was no ax. I mean, the car like just went down the,
yeah.
not like a real embankment, but it stopped. And he passed away and it was
Mm,
unexpected and he was fairly young. And um, so I flew home for the, I flew home to just be there for her and go to the funeral, stuff like that. And so that particular friend, like we had a group of three through high school and not through college, but we were still pretty close, all three of us. And so the third friend still lived here in Utah. And so I flew back. It was maybe like the day after he passed away. And I flew back and this friend picked me up from the airport. And then we were going to go to this friend's home, which was her parents' home. And so she picks me up from the airport and she's like, I'm so glad that you could fly home. And, I was like, yeah, me too. And she's like, no, like, I don't know what to say. And so,
mm.
like, you've learned this in school, right? You know what to say. And I'm like, no, like, I haven't maybe got to that place yet in class. Like, I have no idea. I was busy getting a plane ticket home. I haven't even thought about what we're going to say. And she's
You
like,
hadn't gotten to that chapter in the textbook, Jackie, of what you to do or what to say when your
what's
friend's
the advice
dad
for
dies.
when, and so
Yeah.
she's like, okay, well, you got between now and the airport and the house. And, I was just
Oh,
like,
geez.
I I don't know what I'm gonna say. So we go to the house. My friend had picked up like a uh, 12 pack of Diet Coke because we knew the family liked
Mm.
Diet Coke. And so, she's kind of like, you go to the door first. Like she's kind of pushing me to the door, right? So we go to the door. My friend answers the door, and I'm standing there with a 12 pack of Coke. And I just said, I don't know what to say, but we brought Diet Coke. And she just like gives me a hug, right? And I'm
Aw,
like,
yeah.
I'm just so sorry this happened, right? And
Oh, yeah.
so we went in and visited with the family and we're talking about her dad and memories and stuff like that. And then we were going to leave. And my friend was like, see, you knew what to say. And I'm like, I
Not
don't,
really.
I had no, like, I literally said, I don't know what to say, but we brought
Yeah.
Diet Coke.
Yeah.
Um, I'm like, I don't think you always have to know what to say. Cause
Yeah.
again, sometimes words are inadequate. And
Hmm.
I think what mattered, like as I reflect back on that, what mattered is that we showed up.
Right.
And there is nothing I could say that's going to make this unexpected passing of her dad better.
Hmm.
And that's not my job. Like, and having lost both of my parents, when people try to make it better for you, that's
Right.
just, you just know they're not somebody I'm going to be with in my grief because they're
Right.
telling me I can't handle this, which is why I'm trying to make it better.
Right. Well, they just can't handle their own uncomfortable
Right.
feelings, and so they're
Right.
just like, I want to fix this
Yeah. And you just
with my
know, like,
words.
okay, this is not somebody I can talk to.
Right. Because really, you just want to sit there and feel crappy,
Uh huh.
and you need someone to sit there and feel crappy with
Yeah.
you instead of like
Yeah.
talking.
Or there can be tears and there can be laughter and then followed by tears. And, like, yeah, just being there in the array of emotions that comes with grief, especially when
Hmm.
it's young and unexpected. He was like in his 50s, I think. Um, so it was, young and unexpected. And
Yeah.
I think we just have to be able to, kind of follow the feelings, which if you're uncomfortable feeling, that's not going to go well.
Right.
So, I mean, I think
Right.
there can be some phrases like, you know, uh, I care about you, I'm here for you.
Yeah.
That can be some of that language that we're learning, but we're not going to learn this language that makes it better. And so sometimes we don't know what to say. And again, I think we have to allow ourselves that sometimes words are inadequate. And so if
Right.
you don't know what to say, just saying like, I don't even know what to say, but I'm so sorry, or I'm feeling how hard that is. I can
Yeah.
feel that. And I'm so sorry that happened. Like
Hmm.
sometimes we are fumbling through the words because we're feeling the emotions with them. And I think that's what matters. Like they feel us feeling.
Right. Yeah. Or even just like, I'm here when you're ready.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what do you need? Or let me know
Yeah.
what you need if you do know. Um, yeah, like it's really like it feels hard, but it actually is quite simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, just the hardest part is not fixing it or not feeling like you have to come up with this like beautiful thing to say to like make it better or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
which is fixing it, like just not fix it.
Right. Well, usually
Yeah.
that's about you
Right.
wanting to feel like you said something brilliant
Right.
instead of just like, I just was willing to show up and feel with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
Okay, anything else before we wrap up on this one? And I will say, listeners, if you have questions or if you're thinking like, why didn't they cover this? You can email me. You can answer those questions. Bridget and I, if we have enough of them, we'll hop on and do another follow-up podcast with your questions. Um, so yeah, if we missed something that you were really wanting us to get to and we just didn't know that, let us know that.
Yeah. So then what would be our a good like wrap up of a working definition? I feel like we covered a lot of different points. Someone who is
Mhm.
emotionally safe,
Yeah.
vulnerable,
Like
competent.
yeah. And I think sometimes has the capacity. We talked about capacity or being available for that.
Yeah.
And, I think we can like you being overall competent with emotional availability doesn't mean every day you're ready at the drop of a hat to be
Right.
emotionally available, right? Which is fine. If we know how to do it overall, we can say, okay, give me, 20 minutes to wrap up work and be done with that
Hmm.
so then I can transition to this conversation. That's fine. Like, it doesn't mean it has to be on demand. Um,
Yeah.
but if overall we're not able to do it, then I would say we might need to, get in, do some work, do our own work with a professional.
Right.
So I think that, that definition of emotional availability is, it goes back to having, like you were saying, emotional intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
having access to all of the emotions in a regulated way for ourselves and for another person, and allowing another person to do that for us.
Yeah. And not going in, like the emotional maturity piece, I think, is not going in telling somebody what they need emotionally. You're allowing them to tell you, and then you either say, okay, I can give that to you, or actually, I don't think I can either right now or at all. Like, is there
Yeah.
anybody else that you could go to get
Yeah.
that right now?
And I think sometimes, especially when you're new and practicing, you may not know. You can ask questions.
Right.
I usually tell people, like clients, like, if you could say, if they're not using emotional language, you could say, like, yeah, that would make you feel sad. And if
Mm,
they don't actually feel sad, they'll be like, well, no, actually right now I think I'm feeling this. They're usually not upset if you get it wrong, if you get that
right.
emotion wrong, if you're guessing at what that is. They're usually not upset. They'll just correct you, and you go with what they said. And
Yeah.
sometimes as a therapist, like, I might say, like, I'm feeling really angry on your behalf. And they're like, oh yeah, no, I don't feel any anger. I'm not going to argue with them. Even
Right.
though sometimes I'm like, we'll get to the anger, but that'll be down the road or whatever. We'll get to the
Mm,
sadness, and that'll be later, and
yeah.
I'll go with what they give me in that moment.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully, I don't, hopefully that maybe cleared some stuff up for some people.
Well, I think sometimes, though, some of these things are more in the body, and so it's hard.
Right.
Like, and if they want this, like, clear definition, clear, like, I don't know that we're capturing emotional availability.
Sure. That's true.
It's a feeling, and we have to be comfortable responding to what comes up in our body and talking about that, whether that's for us or whether that's for another person. Sometimes it's knowing, yeah, this isn't my story that I'm feeling. I think I'm feeling theirs. And can I
Mm,
approach them with that in a way that is, trying to be let in or be open with that and not a threat?
yeah.
Um, but I think sometimes that's why, like, clients will say, I feel like I fumble. And I'm like,
Mm,
yeah, yeah, sometimes we do.
right.
Because again, we also live in a culture that prioritizes intellect,
Hmm.
and you're trying to go in with the body and the emotions. And I mean, you'll get better the more you practice. And sometimes we still kind of fumble through.
Right. Well, and like we also live in a culture that's all about productivity and how productive
Mhm.
you are. And
Yeah.
this is not like a resolution, like, oh, I produced
Right.
this thing, I'm all better now. Like, that's not the
Right.
way your emotions work.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, there's no, there's no like end product in that.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, there was another point that I had that flew out of my mind. Oh, good enough. Good enough
Oh, yeah.
emotional
Yes.
availability.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, like we talk about good enough therapy, good enough parenting, good enough relationship.
Uh-huh.
Maybe we can also add that on to like good enough emotional availability. You're a
Yeah.
person
Yes. Yeah.
who's going to have bad days. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
And like I said, I didn't say this. Like, I want to say, I think there are skills, like, the Gottmans
right.
have skills that, like, one of the things when am talking with a couple and we're going to start practicing some of the Gottman skills, I'll say, like, I mean, they do provide a script. I mean, a little
Mhm.
bit plug and play, like, choose from this menu item and then plug it in and say it. But they do give some pretty concrete scripts that I'm like, initially follow the script.
Right.
as you get more and more fluent in it, you won't have to follow the script, but you will still be following the steps of this like exercise, right? And you
Mm,
don't necessarily have to pull out your paper and do the script form. But it is a pretty good place to start and just stick to the script and stick to their instructions and keep practicing that. And you'll pick it up and you'll be able to have healthier conversations.
right. Yeah. I mean, again, like you said, it's just a language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No one taught you this language growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Most people, it's not just you specifically. Most people were never really taught this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, don't feel bad that you
Right.
just don't know or that you're
Mm-hmm.
learning like some other really kind of big world of thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know,
Well, and sometimes I'll say, like, if people did grow up in a home where this was a native language they were learning, they might feel more comfortable with it
mm,
and they might feel like I know how to do it, but it's not like every time they know exactly what to say. They're
right,
still kind of stepping into the abstract, which our emotions are much more abstract.
right,
And, anytime we're stepping into the abstract, there's some uncertainty and some unknown. Now, again, they may have that ease and they feel comfortable stepping into that and feel like they can get to the other side with the person. Um, but it's not like they're going in with a set of here's what I say, here's the sentences.
right.
It's not that because it's going to
Yeah,
look different each
right,
time.
yeah.
Well, Bridget, thank you so much for being on here again, and I will
Yeah,
let you know if we get questions, and if not, we'll
great.
have you back again on something else, a different topic.
Cool. Sounds great. Thanks,
All right.
Jackie.
Thanks. At the end of this episode, I want to remind you that your story matters. Remember, there's something meaningful in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie.